Best Irish music on irishradio.org with Jerry Byrne.
My next guest is PJ Cunningham. Now, we've chatted before on the show, as regular listeners will recall. PJ is a respected journalist, author and publisher from County Offaly, now based in County Wicklow. PJ joins me to talk about a newly released book. It's GAA, Grassroots Stories from the Heart of the GAA. Now, he has compiled and edited this collection. The depth and variety of stories is vast, as you'll see by visiting PJ's website, ballpointpress.ie. PJ, it's lovely to speak to you again.
And the pleasure is all mine, Jerry, as always.
Now, PJ, we grew up in Ireland, familiar, of course, needless to say, with GAA sports, whether people played it locally for the pride of the local parish or town or village, or even where a county rivalry was involved. Now, wherever Irish communities exist, at home in the UK, the US, Australia, or elsewhere, Gaelic games brought people together for recreation and also social life. Now, facts and figures are readily available, but your unique book brings to life special moments from personalities, but also ordinary people, no less passionate.
Yeah, well, you've hit the nail on the head there, totally, Jerry. What's happened really is I decided that after listening to many years, listening to people telling stories in pubs, in clubs, along the sidelines, going to and from matches, and you say to yourself, how come no one has ever really compiled the ordinary person's stories and memories of matches and events and some things, we say meetings and things that happened that had a bit of skullduggery in them, or a little bit of passion, maybe sometimes a little bit of tragedy or pathos. And funny enough, just as the lockdown came last March, 12 months, I had this idea top in my head. And you know what I did, Jerry? I went into the office and I said, I'm going to start from today. And this will be something to keep me going, because I knew from what the people were saying in both Britain and Ireland that we were in for, they said a couple of weeks, and then they said another couple of weeks, and then it was months. And then a couple of people I respected said, this is going to go on for a year and a half, if not more. So I said, now is the time in a lockdown where you can talk to people who have time to talk to you, and I had time to talk back to them. So I'll always remember the lockdown, unlike most people, Jerry, who dreaded this. I remember it as a time I've made so many new friends, because I've talked to people. A man, Dan Kerr, has written a story in this book about going to All Ireland in the 30s and 40s. He's still alive in Monaghan, near your own native home. I've talked to another Monaghan man in his 90s, the legendary Moyna, Tommy Moyna from the Moyna clan. And I went up to see him when I got the chance, when Windows developed in June last year and that. And I went down to Wexford, I went to Kerry, I went to Mayo, and anywhere I could when I got a window. But if I couldn't get the window, I was talking to people on the phone. I was saying to them, look, I've got your story, I'm going to write it for you, I'm going to send it to you then, and you have to approve. Because sometimes, as you can imagine, Jerry, people of that age, they're not going to sit down and write the stories, but they can tell you the stories. And basically, I'm just using their words and their remembrances to write the story for them and then send it back. And some of them will make little changes. I said Jerry, but I meant Terry, or whatever the situation is. And we changed things around to suit them. So we ended up that it was a kind of there was a great line Conhulan used to say, a cornucopia of riches. We had so many stories. We said, flipping hell, what are we going to do here? So we decided that we do 2 volumes. And this is the first volume that's out. And the first volume, there's about 150 stories in it, Jerry. And you were saying, what you said, and it's so true what you said, that the GAA is the most universal village, that Irish people know. Because whether you're living in London or living in Birmingham or living in Alabama in America or Brisbane in Australia or living in downtown Clare, County Offaly, we're all the same. We love to go to matches. We love to talk about players who play well. We love to give out about managers who didn't make the proper switches. And then we love to have the bit of fun in games that we have when we get together for a few drinks or for occasions when a GEA presentation or whatever has been made. So that's basically, I tried just to capture, as I said to an awful lot of people, Jerry, if your story is about winning All Ireland, or if your story is about the number of All-Stars you have, you really shouldn't be looking to get into this book, because this is the book, stories from the heart of the GA. This is the stories about the club player. This is the story about the selector on the Junior B team. This is the story about the driver bringing teams to and from for years. This is the story about the conniving mentor who sees that his team is going to be beaten out the ditch in a football match in Kilkenny and has the wherewithal to tell one of the players to kick the ball out into the big cornfield next running alongside the GA field. And he has a penknife in his hand up his sleeve, and when the ball is dispatched out into the growing corn, no one can see the ball for a second, and he stabs it to death, so to speak. So the match can't continue. And what happens then is he gets them back into his own field 2 weeks later. But having seen that the juvenile team he faced were all shaven, he made sure the lads that were playing the next day were that bit older still, and they won the match. Now, they're the sort of stories I went looking for. And once I spoke to people and they started to see that it wasn't about achievement. You know, my father won 25 county medals or 7 in a row or something like that. That it was more about the odd story, you know, the story of laughter and the story of small-time Ireland, you know. And what it does is it makes us unique because we're able to see all sides, the three sides of the truth, you know, the lad from the other team, the lad from our team, and then we know ourselves what really happened, you know, that way. And no one in the GAA knows that better than GAA people themselves. And what I was trying to get was as many of the sides I could possibly get, and let people then adjudicate what the real truth was on the stories. You know, I'll give you an example, for instance. And there's a name that's well known, Niall Quinn, who played for Sunderland, played for Manchester City, played for the Republic of Ireland, was a brilliant, lovely man, as everyone knows, gentleman. And Niall came back to play. He built a house in Eadstown in County Kildare, and he came back to play. And the first day, the trainer didn't want to let him in, even though the priest, Father Breen, he's well known as the horsey man in Cheltenham for years. But Father Breen, when he was in his parish, and he said, "Oh, look, you better play him." And the trainer said he didn't train this week. But there was such a big crowd. Father Breen had told the Evening Herald and told local radio and the nationalists that Niall was going to be starring, that the trainer had to let him in for a few minutes, and Niall did okay. So he said, "Look, if you come and play next week, we have a big derby match against Salins, and I'll play you." So he played him full forward. And Niall, of course, now, if you think of it, 6'7", and very hard to mark, particularly in the Junior B match, which this was. So he was fouled 3 times and 3 penalties, and he stuck away 2 of them, right? And then when he was fouled for the 3rd time, the umpire, of course, who was from Salin, says, "Go back to England, you diving bee," to him, you know. But the referee said no, he was pulled down, it's a penalty. So he stuck the ball into the back of net. He's after scoring 3 goals and 3 penalties. Now, you might remember, it's just to jog listeners' memories, that in the World Cup in 2002, we lost out in penalties to go to the quarter-final against Spain, and Niall didn't take a penalty. And people often said to him, "Why didn't you?" Now, I think he had his own reasons on the day. He didn't feel up to it or whatever. But at the end of the match here, in the junior football match, there's obviously handbags going on at the end. You know, you wouldn't have won only for this import coming in. He shouldn't have been playing, all this sort of stuff. So Niall said, "Look, the goalie only looked about 16 or 17. He said, "I'll go up and shake his hand and say something nice to him." So he went up to the goalie and he says, "Look, hard luck. You nearly got the last penalty I took there." And the young lad said to him, "Would you ever let off?" He said, "You had no bottle when we needed you to do out in Japan to take a penalty. You think you're great taking 3 here tonight." Now, Niall laughed at him, but there's a couple of twists. I don't want to undo the story he had to tell about that young fella and about going on to play for years afterwards, where the Bomber Liston and Ogie Moore and people came to see him playing, that he got so involved at local level that he played up to the time he was nearly 40. And that story will never make the headlines, Jerry, as we were saying earlier. But they're the sort of stories that kind of it's done in 5 pages, and that's Niall Quinn's story. And then you go on to PJ Cunningham's story, and that's 2 pages. And you come on to the next story, it's maybe only a half a page. And the one thing, and again, I'm not blowing my own coal when I say that people love this book. And they love the book. I haven't written a story in this book other than to help people write their own stories. I haven't written my own story. I've kept it for the second volume. And there's lovely stories in the second volume. I've about 2/3 of the way through it. So if people are listening and saying, "Oh God, I didn't hear about that first Grassroots book, I'd love to tell them the story," then if you wouldn't mind me just putting it forward, if you write to me at pj@gaastories.ie, I'll get back to you and we can talk about your story and we can put it into the second volume, because I do believe that most of the stories in this Grassroots book, the first one that's just out now the last month and has been launched on Friday week, the 12th, by the GA president in Croke Park, most of those stories would die out with people who have told them maybe in pubs or have told them at events, but they've never been committed to print. And this is what I hope, if there's one social, cultural plus to come from putting these 150 stories together, is that they're there for posterity. They're there for your grandchildren and mine. And in 100 years' time, somebody like Seamus McCrory's story about Derry Games, or something like Fionnuala McNicholas stitching up the red hand, a very funny story, they're going to be there for hundreds of years because they're now in book form. And as you know yourself, once something is in book form, we've had books around since Gutenberg invented the printing press in the 13 or 1400s, and we've had the best records of all. Now, stuff go out into the cloud and people record stuff, but it's still not as accessible as something that's in a book or something that's committed to print. And that's, if you ask me, like, what is the thing I hope most out of it, I hope that people, enjoy the stories because they're written in such a format that they're short. You could get into bed at night and read 2 of them in 15 minutes and go to sleep. Now, I hope you don't go to sleep because of the subject matter. I hope you go to sleep because it's your time to go to sleep at that hour of the night anyway. And then you can flick through. Now, I've had a number of people saying to me that, they thought they'd only read maybe 10 or 15 pages, but they end up reading 40 or 50 of a night. But that's good. And then I had a lovely man on saying to me, I'm spacing them out now, 3 a night, so that I'll have a read every night between now and New Year. And again, that's lovely to hear because somebody is enjoying the product of what you put together if they're giving you that sort of feedback.
Indeed. Now, I interviewed a 92-year-old Kerry man, Tony Horgan, a great storyteller and community stalwart in London now. Newspapers and archive libraries he'd contribute to encouraged him to capture compelling memories in an autobiography, creating an excellent social history. Now, Tony wisely realised only what goes into print survives undistorted. And that's more or less what you were saying yourself, PJ.
I'm saying I know for a fact that the amount of people who say to me now, we got videos done and we had a video of this and it got lost or it got damaged in the machine when we were trying to replicate it. The one thing for sure is that there's thousands of these books out there now, they will survive into I'm not saying the next millennium, but certainly the next 100 years and maybe a good bit beyond that. And what they do is, you think, this book, funny enough, if you go through it, Jerry, what it does is it almost tells you what Ireland was like to live in. Now, for instance, we have a book from a fellow called a story from a fellow called Paddy Phelan down in Waterford, from tracing his great-grandfather and his great-grandmother getting married in 1860 and making his field available for the local sporting young lads who had a mind to play CAD and whatever it was called back then. Don't forget, the GA wasn't formed till 1884. So it was some 20, maybe a quarter of a century almost before the GA. And locals were looking after their youth by having them playing games against one another and by coming up with rough rules about how you should play football or how you should play hurling at that time. And you get a feel for what the Ireland was like under the Brits back in the 1880s, 90s. And then we have two brilliant stories from Bloody Sunday. One, which I just came across, Jerry, the word is probably serendipitously, very, very luckily. A man rang me one night called Oliver McMahon. And he said, "Peter, I just want to tell you a story. I don't know if it'll suit for your book, but here it is." He said, myself and my mother, now he said my mother was born in 1900, so it was the 1990s. So she was in her 90s. And we were watching RTE one evening, and Croke Park, the old Cusick stand, was being knocked down in Hogan stand for the rebuilding of the new ones. And he said the two of us were just sitting there drinking a cup of tea, watching it in the 9 o'clock news. And out of the blue, she says to me, "You know, I was there, Ollie, on Bloody Sunday." And he said, "Why, your mother? Jeez, you kept that quiet." And she says, "Yeah, I was there that day, the 21st of November, 1920. And he said, "Do you mind me asking you, mother, why you were there?" And she said, "I was Mick Hogan's girlfriend." And he said, "That's unbelievable. And have you kept that?" He says, "Yeah, I've never told anyone about that in the intervening, I'd say it was 75 years in the intervening space, because she was only 16 at the time when she was going out with Mick Hogan, as she called him, but Michael Hogan, as we know it, the Hogan stand is called after. And basically, Michael Hogan, as you know, Bloody Sunday, Jerry, Tipperary were playing Dublin, and it was a big event. And he had written up to her. She was in boarding school in Dublin, and he had written up to say, "I'm playing in Croke Park on Sunday. Would you come to the match?" And she went to the match, and she had to crawl out in her elbows and her knees because of the shooting in case she got killed herself. And she made her way to somewhere in the south side of the city, around Ranelagh somewhere, where the Tipperary crowd normally convened in a public house. And when she got there that evening, she was met with the news that her boyfriend had been killed. And she kept it to herself. She was only a young girl. And then she met a guy from Armagh called McMahon, and they went to live in Carlow. And the sons and daughters, I think she had 10 or 11 kids. And they grew up in Carlow and they grew up in Dublin. And this guy, Oliver, who wrote the story for me, would tell you he's more a rugby man than a GA man. He said, "I don't really have a background in GA, but I thought that was an amazing story from my mother." And I just said, that was pure gold dust to stumble on a little story like that. And there was another one then about a guy, real Dublin name, Yara Duffy, Christopher Duffy, but he was only 16 as well at the time. But he had 2 bullets lodged in his neck from Bloody Sunday. And not only did he survive, but he went on to play for Dublin for decades later and won National League medal, I think, and won various Leinster medals. I don't think he ever won an All-Ireland. But another incredible story, and that was told to us, again, by somebody who understood the sort of stories we were looking for. And I have to say, those 2 Dublin stories are gems in the necklace of tales that we have put together.
Indeed, so sounds intriguing, and I'll have to say it's a great follow-up to your, to the previous book from the Candy Store to the Galtymore. Now, contributors to the book are a real who's who, indeed, legends such as Keith Barr, Sean Boylan, Bernard Flynn, Joe Connolly, and many more. Now, also your colleague, writer Joe Carney, has input with Tony O'Hare, May Leonard, and others. I sense you get as much satisfaction from including precious stories of the not so famous, as you said. Now, these people who love to turn straight to the back sports pages of newspapers, maybe who remember the feelings at any given time related to matches and the build-up and all of that.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. I'm very, very blessed to have had about maybe 20 or 30 big names. As you said there, the people, the Niall Quinn, the Bernard Flynn's, and John B. Kane and Billy Kane and all those people, Dermot Gilleese, well-known, May Leonard, a great novelist, poet in her own right. A lovely story about Limerick from May and her husband who played minor for Limerick. And she was a rugby girl and she met this GA fella and she wrote lyrically so good. Like hers is one of the longest stories, but she had 3 stories in one, if you like, the Blessed Trinity. And I don't mean to be sacrilegious saying that, but it was a lovely, lovely story. you're absolutely right, Jerry, and I'm only getting back to saying what you said. The real gold dust in this book, is from the ordinary guy, the 100-year-old, the 50-year-old, and there's plenty of women writing it. I'm delighted about that as well. There's beautiful stories just told in half a page, in 2 pages, in 5 pages. And I think there's very few go over, say, 6 or 7 pages. So they're all little nuggets, in my opinion. In fact, I'm really proud of every story in there. And I do hope that anyone who gets it, I hope they enjoy it as much as I enjoyed putting it together, Jerry.
Indeed. No, it's all very reliable, PJs. I know it's a scary thought to think that there's only around 50 days left until Christmas now. GAA Grassroots Stories from the Heart of the GAA Volume 1, compiled by your good self, PJ Cunningham. It's available from www.ballpointpress.ie. Now, you can follow the link on our website, irishradio.org. Now, I'd say those gifting the book for Christmas, that it will be popular. How has the reaction been so far? It hasn't been officially launched yet, and it's only just out, but you're bound to be sort of getting the vibes of a good reaction.
I have, I'm really delighted that it's been in the Sunday Independent already, even though, as you say, it's not launched. It's been in, the Sunday World did a 2-page spread on it the week before last. It's been in all the local provincial papers. Every provincial paper in the country has run stories because they're from counties. There's 5 stories from Mayo, there's 3 stories from Offaly, there's 5 stories from Galway, wherever there is. And I think it's very important that when we do stories from the GAA, while the GAA really, if you're talking about somewhere in Galway, you're really talking about anywhere else in the rest of Ireland, or the GAA communities in Britain or America for that matter. But it's still nice to have a couple of stories if you're from Galway, a Joe Connolly story, or somebody that, it might be your club, or it might be Barry Enriquez, who lived in England for many years up around Manchester and was a great journalist in Kilkenny when he came back. But he's written really a lovely story about growing up in Tuam, when his uncle, Frank Stockwell, and Sean Purcell were the lords and the gods of the 1950s in GAA. You will recall, if not old enough, like myself, through song and story, how they were the terrible twins. And right through, I was on RTE, I was on all the local radio stations talking about it, and they're coming looking for me to go on Kerry Radio, Wexford Radio, Carlow, Kilkenny, and basically it has, as Tommy Murphy from Carlow was on, he was the PRO of Carlow County Board for years, and he just said to me, he said, Peter, I was in the local Eastlands here this morning, and you know what, you're going to have to come down and do a signing. He said, there's so many people you've hit a chord with this book. Now, again, when I say I'm not trying to blow smoke for myself or anything like that. I'm just saying the quality of stories that the people came up with and we edited into this book are such, Jerry, that I don't expect this book just to sell for Christmas and be gone. This is a book that will be there and will be on the bookshelves for years to come, because what it is it's relevant particularly to people of our generation. People say from born in the 60s right up to now, people born from the 60s, say, back into the 50s, 40s, 30s, they know all about the band. They know all about the vigilantes. I have some hilarious stories, Jerry. If you had time, I could tell you a story about one guy who's one of my best pals, Ricey Scully. He played in 3 different counties one day under different names, and the 3 counties were, he is from Clara County, Offaly. He drove to play hurling 11 o'clock in Dublin in the morning. He was picked up by a Cavan car in Dublin to play for Blackline in the Junior Football Championship in Cavan at 3 o'clock, 3:30. And then at 5 o'clock, he had to jump in the car and he had to get back to play for his own club in a big tournament game in Clara at 7:30. And that guy went on then to play down in Tipperary the following week, where he had to pretend he was a priest from Rockwell. Now, his name was Ricey Scully, and there was I think it was a Father Enda Scully in Rockwell that time. So he was playing Moria as if he was fat around the Scully. But the guy who got him to go down and play said, listen, go over to the priest's house before you leave, Clara, and get one of the robes, you know, the collar and the black front and things like that, just in case anybody thinks you're not a priest. You might have to stick that on after the match. Now, as it happened in the match, he was the star player, and he got into goal to save a penalty that they won by 10 points to 9. But then the crowd started to get a bit, you know, who's this import, and shouting and bawling. So he said he'd make a run for the car, and he made a run for the car, and half Tipperary came running after him, you see. And then he remembered, oh God, he hadn't locked the car. People didn't do that time. But in the ignition key was in his trousers pocket, you see, in the boot. So when he opened the boot, didn't he see the priest's garb? So he put the priest's garb on, the collar and the black, whatever you call it, shirt or vestment, and he turned around, and it was like Dracula was coming with his fangs, and suddenly he saw a cross. They all jumped back 20 yards and said, oh, Father, we didn't know you were a priest, you know. So the next thing then, another priest came up and was trying to invite him to go up to Rockwell for dinner. And he says, no, Father, he says, I'm in a hurry. If I don't get out of here quick, I have to save somebody's life. And in the story, he says, and that life was my own, because if people knew the truth, I would have been lynched.
Absolutely fantastic. PJ, well done on the huge amount of work and pulling together the excellent content, which will resonate with so many people. Keep in touch, let us know about the reviews, and we'll give out the feedback. Enjoy what I'm sure will be high praise, and I hope you can relax for a while before you have to go full steam ahead with the Volume 2, even though I know you've quite a lot of it done already. Now, once again, GAA Grassroots Stories from the Heart of the GAA is compiled by PJ Cunningham. It can be ordered from ballpointpress.ie, and there's a link at irishradio.org. PJ, as always, I've enjoyed our chat. Well done on achieving the huge task of gathering and editing the content and getting it into print and distribution. So many of us will identify with the content. Wishing you every success.
Jerry, thank you very much. And really and truly, I've enjoyed the chat so much. I could have chatted to you for another hour. It seems like 5 minutes we're talking only.